Why, hello, and welcome to Hermetic Journeys. I'm your host, TonyG, and this is the second part in a three-part series on Egypt that I'm doing, my trip to Egypt, that is. Did I say three-part? Yeah, I did. I lied, because in the first video I said it would be two parts, but as I began working on this second part, I realized there's no way I can possibly fit all that I want to say about that trip into two videos. Before I continue, I want to say a huge thank you to my friend NEXT, who took my first video and put it on his media platforms, and oh my god, my channel exploded. I'm so shocked. Thank you to all of those who have all new subscribers. Oh my goodness, thank you so much for subscribing. I hope I can live up to your expectations. And again, NEXT, many thanks, my friend. It really has made a tremendous difference here. In any case, it's still my humble little video channel, my YouTube channel, so I will keep it humble and goofy and silly, but we're going to have a lot of fun and learn a lot of stuff, right? So, today we're going to talk about the temples and the Sphinx, which had a tremendous impact on me. Certainly the Sphinx, and each temple had a unique feeling to it, because I went to Egypt like a rabid dog looking for data. You know, like I cannot make bricks without straw, right? So I went to Egypt like as a rabid dog, and what happened was Egypt said, no. This is a spiritual journey, TonyG. And indeed, it was. Now, for those of you who have not seen part one of this series, I highly recommend you click on the card above me and go back to part one so you can watch part one, because part one explains more about the tour, all right? NEXT's Adept Expeditions tour. All right, for those of you who already have, let's get right into this next video. So here we go. If we look back historically, women really didn't have a lot of opportunity for leadership roles in ancient times, okay? All right? It's gotten a little better, but it's not much better now. But in any case, they really didn't have a great opportunity. There weren't many female leaders. But if you were a woman, probably one of the better places you could live would be ancient Egypt, because women could live independently, buy and sell land, file for divorce, file a lawsuit. I mean, they had some power, you know what I mean? I mean, most places didn't have things like that, and women didn't have that kind of power. And there were some pharaohs who ruled alongside their queens, like Pharaoh Akhenaten and Nefertiti. There were some women who became pharaohs, but for the most part it was a unique occurrence. We're talking about a woman who took the reins of kingship and was an integral component to the success and prosperity of New Kingdom Egypt. We're talking about, of course, Hatshepsut. Now, there were other women who took leadership roles before Hatshepsut, one specifically, Sobek-Neferu, and she ruled in the 12th dynasty, a few hundred years before Hatshepsut, and she ruled for 4 years. But our focus is on this remarkable woman with an impossible name and the circumstances leading up to her becoming Pharaoh of Egypt. Hatshepsut lived from 1507 to 1458 BC. She was the 5th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. Remember the first video with the pyramids, we talked about the Old Kingdom. And there was a Middle Kingdom and a New Kingdom, okay? And there was some stuff that went on in between that was not necessarily so great for the Egyptians. Foreign rules came in, and you know, Egypt was invaded, and there was periods of chaos. But essentially those are the three big periods of history we're talking about: Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. Here we're talking about the New Kingdom. And after that came the Greeks and the Romans, who ruined just about everything. Just kidding. The word Hatshepsut is not a name. It's actually a title. And most pharaohs had several titles. We call this guy Tutankhamun, thinking it's his name, but it's really a title. It means living image of Amun. Which is just a lovely title, don't you think? Now, Hatshepsut's title, seen here in her cartouche, meant united with Amun, foremost of noble ladies. Just another incredible title. Now, it was important for her to identify herself as pharaoh with the god Amun, because he was the primary god of Egypt at that time. Okay? She also proclaimed that her father, Thutmose I, had always intended for her to be pharaoh. But that's not necessarily true, at least historians don't think it's true because typically, as you know, women were not pharaohs. But she also named herself Ma'et Ka Ray. That title means truth is the soul of the sun god. Another really excellent title. According to historians, Hatshepsut ruled for 22 years. She was extremely smart. In addition to that, she had an excellent administration and her policies promoted trade with other countries. So she did an incredible job in the time that she ruled Egypt. So how did Hatshepsut become pharaoh? It's a little complicated. Bear with me here. So Hatshepsut was born to Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Amos. Okay, pharaohs had many wives and they had concubines because the idea was to produce a male heir to the throne. And if the great royal wife couldn't produce a male heir, they would take other avenues to produce one. Okay, so she also had two brothers. Now those two brothers died, so they didn't outlive Thutmose I. So there was no official male heir to the throne, pure blood. Hatshepsut was the only one that was pure blood, but she was a woman. So Thutmose I goes and has another child with a lesser wife and names him Thutmose II. Thutmose II becomes pharaoh, and to further establish his legitimacy to the throne, marries his half-sister, our hero, Hatshepsut. They do not produce a male heir, and Thutmose II pursues other avenues and produces a male heir through a lesser wife. This child is Thutmose III. Now, when Thutmose II died, Thutmose III became pharaoh, but Thutmose III was very, very young. He was 2 years old. So his stepmother, our hero, Hatshepsut, stepped in as his regent, making decisions for him and taking care of him. But after a few years, she thought to herself, why am I doing this when I could just be pharaoh? And that's what she did. So she put on the false beard the pharaohs wear and the headdress and everything, and she became pharaoh. And she did an incredible job, as we've heard already. Historically, Thutmose III sort of disappears from the scene while Hatshepsut's calling the shots as pharaoh. When he reappears, he's a young man, ambitious young man, and Hatshepsut assigns him to be Egypt's military commander-in-chief. As luck would have it, and this is incredible, he turns out to be a military genius, okay? He's known as the Napoleon of Egypt. He runs 16 campaigns in 20 years and expands Egypt's borders into the Near East. Incredible. Now, it should also be known that Hatshepsut always honored Thutmose III's kingship. She never said, I am the pharaoh, he is not. That stuff didn't go on. And there's some really ugly, older Egyptological versions of this story where upon Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III destroyed all of her statuary and chiseled out her cartouches wherever they were. New information has come to light to indicate that that is not true at all. That it, in fact, wasn't Thutmose III, but his son, Amenhotep II, who defaced the monuments and things like that, trying to erase her from history. Maybe he didn't like what Hatshepsut did to his dad. Now that we've familiarized ourselves with Hatshepsut, let's take a look at her mortuary temple. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple is a masterpiece, in my humble opinion, because it looks like it was built last week, doesn't it? Actually, it was built in 1479 BC, and its construction took 15 years. Its elegant and minimalist architecture make this monument a graceful memory to the great pharaoh and her profound construction projects, of which there were many. Hatshepsut was one of the most prolific builders in ancient Egypt, commissioning hundreds of construction projects. Without question, her buildings were grander and more numerous than those of her predecessors, and interestingly, later pharaohs attempted to claim some of her projects as their own. Hatshepsut called this magnificent temple Djeser Djeseru, or the Sacred of Sacred Places, in what is today the city of Deir el-Bahri. That's what we have on this enigmatic and fascinating pharaoh, Hatshepsut. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed it. I just find her to be such a fascinating figure, and the whole story around her is so interesting. So now, let's take a look at one of the stranger places I've been, the Serapeum. The Serapeum, as I said earlier, is probably one of the stranger places that we visited on our tour, in my humble opinion. And you can see for yourself, see what you think, see if you think I'm exaggerating or something, but I think it's really strange. All right, it is an underground tomb located northwest of the Steppe pyramid of King Djoser. in Saqqara. Now, the Steppe Pyramid of King Joseph was one of the first pyramids we looked at in the previous video on Egypt. Okay, so you'll have a sense of what that is. The tomb is dedicated to the Apis bull. The Apis bull was believed to be an incarnation of the god Ptah. The god Ptah spoke the creation into existence. Okay, his very words created our universe. Kind of a cool concept, don't you think? All right, and these bulls, because of their fertility and virility, okay, were associated with Ptah because he was the creator. The Apis bulls lived in the temple of Ptah, and when they died, they were mummified and put into these massive sarcophagi. And it is believed that this tomb was constructed probably around 1400 BC. Now that's the traditional Egyptological perspective I'm giving you here. When you see these granite sarcophagi, it's going to blow your mind. I'm going to show you a picture in a minute. They were quarried in Aswan because anytime you see granite, well, in most cases, when you see granite in a tomb or a pyramid or a temple, it was quarried in Aswan, which is about 400 miles down the Nile. So they had to quarry these massive things, right? Pull them out of the ground, cut them, pull them out of the ground, ship them down the Nile, take them from the Nile to Saqqara, put them underground, carry them underground. And these things were huge, okay? And here's a picture of me standing underneath the lid of one of them. You need to know that the bottom portion of this sarcophagus weighs 80 tons, which is the weight of the space shuttle. Okay? The top part, the lid, weighs 20 tons, which is the weight of a fully populated school bus. So we're talking about some really heavy stuff here, man. It's unbelievable. The other part of this, the part that's really, really weird, is that they are perfectly smooth and perfectly square. And this is where Christopher Dunn came in and said, hey, this is the smoking gun. He literally said that to me. This is the smoking gun of advanced machining in ancient Egypt. Now, here's a picture of Christopher Dunn holding up a square on the inside of one of these boxes. That's how perfectly square it is. Here we see my friends Colin and Derek, joined by NEXT, using Christopher Dunn's instruments to determine how flat the surfaces are inside these boxes. Interestingly, the inside surface is even more precise than the outside. This photo shows a sarcophagus that was abandoned in one of the halls. There were 24 of these massive sarcophagi in the Serapeum. You can see they were roughed out first and must have been finished upon placement in their chambers. Of the 24 sarcophagi, only 3 are inscribed with hieroglyphs, but the quality of these inscriptions is remarkably poor. Why would Egyptians employ such precision in creating these sarcophagi and then adorn them with substandard inscriptions? You can see in this image how these rather cheesy inscriptions were carved over the damaged section of the sarcophagus, which certainly could indicate that these inscriptions might not have been made by the same people who created the sarcophagi. Obviously, they were carved at a later date, right? So here we are again, scratching our heads, right? Saying to ourselves, how did they do this? I mean, I believe it was people that did this. How they did it, the technology that was used, however, must be very different from what we know, or the Egyptians had a way of doing stuff that we have no concept of. You know, they've left no record explaining how they did it, okay? So that is the great mystery and the weirdness of the Serapeum, and I hope you agree with me. It's one of the strangest sights I've ever seen, and I think you maybe agree at this point. So let's take a look now at the Temple of Seti I and the Osirion. Built in 1300 BC by Seti I and completed by his son, Ramses II. Oh yeah, the big boy Ramses II. The Temple of Seti I is a spectacular edifice dedicated primarily to the god Osiris. Why am I so keen on showing you this? Because the artwork is hands down, no bullshit, the best artwork I've seen in any of the temples that we visited in Egypt. Not kidding. So I'm just going to show you some photos of the beautiful artwork that adorns the walls of this magnificent temple. If you notice, unlike other wall reliefs, the figures and glyphs are raised above the surface of the wall. This technique requires so much more effort, but the results are, as you can see, absolutely stunning. In fact, on some of these you can still see the original paint. That's the original paint, 1300 BC. And finally, it is in this temple that the Abydos Kings List resides. The Abydos Kings List, also known as the Abydos Table, is a list of the names of 76 pharaohs of ancient Egypt. And why, you may ask, and rightfully so, does TonyG care about 76 pharaohs listed on the wall of Seti I's temple? Well, it's not so much the pharaohs that were listed on that wall, it's the ones who were not listed on the wall that intrigue me, the ones that were omitted, okay, because they were considered to be illegitimate. Aww. So, who are these pharaohs? Well, some of them you may not be familiar with if you weren't before watching this video, okay? Pharaohs like Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Hatshepsut, and Sobekneferu. They were omitted from this list. They certainly made their mark on history. Those are the pharaohs we remember because they changed the world, okay? So how did they change the world? Well, they were unique. They were different. They saw the world in a way that no one else saw the world. So I guess the moral of the story is, don't worry about being different or unique or odd. I mean, I've been weird my whole life, right? You just might change the world with your unique perspective. Who knows what the future holds, right? All right, so let's take a look at the Osirion. Behind the Temple of Seti I, and in a much lower part of the necropolis, is an out-of-place structure called the Osirion. Why do I call this structure out of place? As you can see from these photos, unlike Seti's lavishly adorned temple, the Osirion is devoid of inscriptions. And as you can see, megalithic stones were used in the construction of the Osirion. Some of these stones weigh in at 100 tons. Because of these features, and the fact that the Osirion is at a much lower level than Seti's temple, it is suggested by alternative theories that the Osirion is far older and may not have been constructed by Seti I or Ramses II, perhaps instead by a pre-dynastic civilization. So when you compare this to Seti I's temple, the Osirion is very, very different, not only in construction, because it's using gigantic stones, but also in the fact that it is devoid of Egyptian hieroglyphs. This construction and the size of the stones utilized in it echo similar constructs in what is called the Valley Temple or the Sphinx Valley Temple. And speaking of the Sphinx, let's take a look at what many people consider to be the greatest sculpture of all time. "66 feet tall and 240 feet long, the Great Sphinx is indeed an enigma. Whose image is that on the Sphinx? Who carved it? How old is it?" The traditional Egyptological perspective, of course, is that it's the pharaoh Khafre. Remember, Khafre was the builder of the second pyramid. His dad was Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, and it is believed that Khafre carved the Sphinx into his image. Okay, that's a traditional Egyptological perspective, and that happened around 2560 BC during Khafre's reign. But there are some Egyptologists over the course of time who have questioned this. One of them, an Egyptian Egyptologist, Salim Hassan, back in 1949, was quick to point out we shouldn't necessarily be so sure about the identity of the Sphinx. Here's what he wrote. "Taking all things into consideration, it seems that we must give the credit of erecting this, the world's most wonderful statue, to Khafre, but always with this reservation. There is not one single contemporary inscription which connects the Sphinx with Khafre. So sound as it may appear, we must treat the evidence as circumstantial until such time as a lucky turn of the spade of the excavator will reveal to the world a definite reference to the erection of the Sphinx." Add to all this stuff, okay, the water weathering theory, in other words, the theory proposed by John Anthony West, who was kind of championing the work of R.A. Schwaller-Delubitz, who we'll hear about in the next video, declaring that the Sphinx enclosure was weathered by torrential rain. Well, when was the last time it rained in the Sahara enough to weather limestone? We're talking about 10,000 BC. So now we have this view of the Sphinx where it's could be much older than traditional Egyptology tells us. We're talking about thousands of years older. Who knows? There's something disproportionate about it. It just really bothers me. And you know, having seen it up close, firsthand, it just really bothers me. The head is disproportionate to the body. I mean, look at it. The second thing is, if the Sphinx was covered up to its neck in sand for most of its existence, why is the body more eroded than the head, right? Take a look at this photograph from 1852. And this gives you a sense of how long the Sphinx has been covered up to its neck in sand. A long, long, long time. And if you consider that it's been buried up to its neck in sand, shouldn't the head be more eroded than the body? If they were carved at the same time, simultaneously? These are the questions that kind of bug me about the Sphinx. So who do I think the Sphinx is? Well, of course, I have no idea, right? But I don't think it looked like this originally. I believe it was carved in the image of a lion or a lioness. In fact, in this really cool model, sculpted by renowned ice sculptor Robert Nayland, it's even more apparent that the current head of the Sphinx is too small for the body. Even if you consider the repairs that might have bulked up the body, it's still too small. When remodeled with the head of a lioness, to me, it regains its proper proportions. Another thing that bothers me about the Sphinx is its name, the Sphinx. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Sphinx is a really, really cool name. However, it's a Greek word, not an Egyptian word. So what was the name of the Sphinx? Manu Seyfzadeh is an amazing researcher who discovered the true name of the Sphinx, among other things, which we'll talk about, through his amazing research, okay, in this wonderful, wonderful book, which I truly love, called Under the Sphinx, The Search for the Hieroglyphic Key to the Real Hall of Records. This book is, if you care about the Sphinx or anything that we've been talking about in this video, go out and buy this book. And I'm not getting kickbacks or anything like that. Manu is not my friend, although he's a friend on Facebook, and I did get to meet him through the tour. He was one of our guides on the tour for a day or so. And he is an encyclopedia of knowledge. He's just amazing. Okay, can't say enough about him, so I'll stop. So what is the name of the Sphinx? Or what was the name of the Sphinx, the real name of the Sphinx? Manu has determined through his research, his understanding of hieroglyphs and all this stuff, that it was, are you ready? Mehit. That's M-E-H-I-T. The research used to arrive at this name is rather complex. So really, you'll have to read Manu's book to fully understand his conclusions. I could not present it properly here. Suffice to say, it's well worth the read. The view from 60,000 feet is that Manu discovered this from a hieroglyph from before Pharaoh Khafre's time. Remember, Khafre is the pharaoh whose image is believed adorns the face of the Sphinx. Okay, now, this image from the stela of Webhem-Nefret, who was a scribe who lived before Khafre, we can see one instance of this hieroglyph. Attached to the back of the lioness is what Manu interprets as a key. And he contends, with supportive hieroglyphic evidence, this was the symbol representing the key that unlocked an ancient archive beneath Mehit, placed there by a pre-dynastic civilization with astonishing knowledge and technology. This was a prophecy originally made by Edgar Cayce, who talked about a hidden chamber under the paws of the Sphinx. What Edgar Cayce didn't tell us, or didn't predict, and what Manu has discovered, was that these archives are more than likely gone. He believes they were removed by Egyptian priests thousands of years ago and taken to a secret place. Now, interestingly, he also contends that some of this knowledge leaked out. In this image of the headboard of the sarcophagus of General Steppe, really cool name, we see a painting called the Vignette of Ray. Within this vignette resides the sun god Ray in the center, surrounded by 9 concentric circles, which Manu believes to be the sun and the 9 planets of our solar system. Now, the Egyptians couldn't possibly have known about that unless this came from somewhere else. And that is Manu's proposal, that this was a piece of some of that knowledge from this pre-dynastic, highly advanced civilization, I'll use the A word, Atlantis, okay, call it what you will, that had knowledge of these things. They weren't aliens, they were people like us, but had a different technology of which we do not understand or know about. Of course, the Sphinx did have a name after it was recarved by Khafre. In fact, over the course of time and by the New Kingdom, it had 2 names. And this stuff was discovered by this guy, Robert Bauval, another one of my heroes like Manu. From the dream stela between the paws of the Sphinx, Bauval found the names Hor-Em-Akhet, meaning Horus in the horizon, and Hor-Akhti, Horus of the horizon. Through some painstaking research, beautifully illustrated in this wonderful book by Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval, called The Message of the Sphinx. So what he found out, what he discovered through his research, was that Hor-em-Akhet represents the Sphinx that's on the ground, the Sphinx that we know today on the Giza Plateau. Horakti is the Sphinx in the sky somehow. Well, what does that even mean? Well, if we think constellations, the closest thing to a Sphinx in the sky would be the constellation of Leo the Lion. So when do these two hook up? I mean, what's the connection between this? Well, if you get some good astronomy software, you can backdate the Giza Plateau to about 10,000 BC, which is precisely when the constellation of Leo sits on the horizon. So what does that mean? Well, the Sphinx gazes due east, and the constellation of Leo sits on the horizon at dawn on that particular point in time. This is through precessional cycles, which I won't get into. It's very complicated. And essentially, we have this beautiful imagery of the Sphinx gazing at a reflection of itself in the sky on the horizon. Oh my goodness, how beautiful is this? And even better, this is my personal spin. If we believe that the Sphinx was originally a lioness, the constellation of Leo is a lion. So we have this beautiful imagery of the masculine and the feminine. And here we get into some alchemical precepts. Essentially, we have complementary polarities on an unimaginable scale. And further, a beautiful representation of yet another alchemical precept, as above, so below. Imagine being there at the moment this magnificent sculpture gazes at one of the most glorious constellations in the sky, both representing the eternal interplay between polarities that govern our universe. This is what I believe to be the true message of the Sphinx. Now that we've gone through all the different theories concerning, well, not all of them, there's a lot more than that. Some of the different theories about the Sphinx and some of the ones that make sense to me, because these are all alternative theories. And these are not embraced by Egyptologists and historians. And I understand that perspective, okay? But I think they're fascinating and they make a lot of sense to me. And I embrace these theories because they're truly interesting. And I just think they make sense. They resonate with me, if you will. We're going to go to a more esoteric and spiritual level and talk about, in this final part of the video, what the Sphinx and the temples taught me. So what did the temples and the Sphinx teach me? Well, let's start with the temples. And if I heard myself saying this a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But each of the temples gives you a distinct and unique feeling when you enter them. It's so weird. It is just so weird. As for instance, in Hatshepsut's temple, I was filled with happiness, elation, and excitement. I mean, yeah, did I always want to see Hatshepsut's temple? Yes, I did. But it was more than that. I mean, I was getting goosebumps. I hate to even admit that. It's just so weird. But I was, you know? And, the other temples each one had a unique feeling to it. How do I explain this? I can't explain it. It just is. So when you go, and go with any XT, of course, when you go to these temples, you'll see each one gives you a unique feeling. Some of them really great, some of them a little weird. The Temple of Man, which we'll talk about in the next video, I felt such energy and power from it. Ramses, one of Ramses' temples, oh my God, total testosterone. I mean, testosterone city, man. I mean, it was just incredible. Each one gives you a unique feeling. How is it possible? How does that even work? I couldn't figure it out. So I stopped trying to figure it out and I just went with it. And when I went with it, when I let go, it just imbued me with this sense of wonder and awe and mystery. It was incredible. What can I tell you, man? So that's what I have to say about the temples. Each one is unique. Each one gives you a unique feeling, and each one is really special. Really, really special. Now the Sphinx, you have to understand that I was never intrigued to any great degree by the Sphinx. I mean, Did I appreciate it on many levels? Absolutely, absolutely. It's an incredible monument. But it was the first thing we saw. 4 o'clock in the morning, from the hotel, drove down into the Giza Plateau. And when I walked down into that Sphinx enclosure, man, oh man, something took hold of me and I started crying. I don't know why. I can tell you that the feeling I got from the Sphinx was one of great reverence and antiquity. It is a sacred place, a sacred spot. And it reaches into you and pulls out these really strong emotions. I can't explain it or put it into words properly. It was the most emotional experience I had in Egypt as a Sphinx. And like I said, it was not on my hit parade. Really it was the pyramids, right? That's what I was there for. And some of the temples, of course, Temple of Man. Temple of Luxor, that is. But anyway, the Sphinx just rattled me. And in a good way, in a really positive, really powerful way. It is so friggin' powerful. I can't tell you. The first 15, 20 minutes I was there, NEXT asked us to walk down into the enclosure in reverence and respect, and that's what everybody did. It was really awesome. Nobody was taking pictures. It was just one of the most powerful moments of my life. The only other thing that came close to it, in terms of Egypt anyway, was the Great Pyramid. When I left the Great Pyramid and I had that powerful experience. So you got to go. You got to go to Egypt, man. And you got to experience these things for yourself, because it's not about knowledge. It's an emotional thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual experience. For me, it was anyway. I mean, it is about knowledge for me. I love it. And I learned so much. I have so much more to learn. But it's really it's a spiritual experience, and you've got to go and see for yourself. So I'll end with that. Thank you for watching. Thank you to all you new subscribers. Truly appreciated. NEXT, thank you, my dear friend. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. You got nothing to lose, right? It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. Anyway, so until the next part 3, which will be our last part on this particular subject of Egypt, my trip to Egypt, will be on R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz and, sorry about the name, and the Temple of Luxor, or as he calls it, the Temple of Man. It is going to be amazing. So, thanks for watching.